Hey, so I know we've already chatted about what I personally considered the best and worst of 2022, but we're not quite done with 2022 just yet because I haven't chatted about my reading wrap-up for December. Now, as previously discussed, my reading for December looked vastly different than I was anticipating and hoping for the month. We didn't see a real concentrated final push of 2022 titles like I ideally hoped because of my family stuff going on. But that is what it is, and I still read a lot of books. And of course, the first book that I read is a poetry collection that I can't talk about because it is a HarperCollins release. There it is. Now it's gone, but I read it, so there we go. I definitely read less HarperCollins titles in December because of the strike. I prioritized other publishers, but some HarperCollins titles it did slip through still because it was still just, my reading, and I am very much a mood reader. And part of me honestly thought the strike would be over by now, but also the realistic part of me knew that that was not probably going to be the case just because we were officially in that holiday season, and publishing, from what I've heard, kind of notoriously shuts down anyway during the holidays, so I should have known better. But there are some titles I'm really, really hoping to talk about, or had been hoping to talk about in January, so it stinks that this is still ongoing, but I of course know it stinks the most for the authors and workers caught up in this that are fighting for the bare minimum at this point, really. But moving on, I then read Even Though I Knew the End by C.L. Polk. This is a novella that we talked about on a Feature Friday. It is set in Chicago in kind of like Depression era, I believe, and it follows a woman who has a deal with the devil of sorts in her history, but she also is a private investigator of sorts, but linked up in a supernatural vein. So it very much kind of has a noir vibe, but it follows this woman as she is searching down this serial killer because she has kind of been promised this break with her selling of her soul, basically. And she wants her soul back because, one, I think most of us would want our soul back, and two, she wants to grow old with the woman she loves. There's this kind of end finish line that she knows is coming, and she's fighting against that. So there's definitely this time constraint. Additionally, her brother has come back into her life, and her brother is caught up in this deal and why she sold her soul in the first place, but very much judges her for that decision because of kind of this organization she had been involved with before this deal was made and how that cast her out of the life she'd previously known. So this book is very short and very condensed, but it covers a lot of ground and it creates this really vibrant atmosphere. I of course loved that it was set in Chicago, but I also loved the ideas it was playing with in terms of what we will sacrifice for love, what the cost of love is, and how we pursue it anyway in many cases. And it did kind of grapple with some of these big ideas while being incredibly action-packed and fast-paced. As I said in my Feature Friday, there were parts that I would have loved to see fleshed out even more, but because it was a novella, I know that it was very conscious that those were the parts that were pared back. So I think that if it had been an expanded kind of universe or novel, those would have been fleshed out more, explored more, but in its current form, those were deemed not as necessary for the story or the ideas being explored. So very clearly conscious artistic choices, but also something that I find myself often wondering or wanting in C.L. Polk work is that kind of expanding of the magic systems in the world in the background. But I also very much appreciate that, at least in the work that I've read, she very much trusts her readers because of this, or this is evidence that she trusts her readers. She expects us to be able to go on the ride with her, and I definitely can, but there are usually these pieces on the periphery as well that I would like to see further explored or deepened. And I recognize that it is a very delicate balance because we want to fully create this world, but we also don't want to get so mired in world building that it kind of snuffs out the momentum of the novel. So I do think that there is a very conscious balancing of this. To be clear, there are just these little pieces that I always want a little bit more from. For example, in this one, the history of this brotherhood of sorts that she was involved in and what exactly that group looked like. But at the same time, we technically get enough to know the stakes, the judgment that is happening, how she's been cast out of her old life, etc. So again, that is potentially a personal preference as much as anything, but this was an incredibly compelling novella and a lot of fun for sure. And then I reread Legendborn by Tracy Deonn in anticipation of Bloodmarked coming out because it had been, I think, 2 years. I think this came out in 2020 and I adored this book, but I wanted to revisit so I could fully appreciate what we were doing in Bloodmarked, and I'm glad I did. did. That being said, I do think that Bloodmarked set up an expert kind of recap of Legendborn for those who didn't go back and reread, and I really appreciated that. When I was younger, I kind of hated those series recaps. I was like, I know, let's get to the new stuff. I have been waiting for years for this. And as I've gotten older, I find it sometimes harder to kind of orient myself back into a world because I have so many more worlds kind of circling up here. But that being said, I do think that this world stuck with me enough that one, I probably would have been fine just diving back in. But because I loved it so much, I really wanted to get that full depth, and I'm glad I did, especially because there were things in my reread of this that I kind of clued into more than I did on my first read. In my first read, I was definitely kind of really caught up in one Bree just as a protagonist, period, as I should be and as I was again, but also this world, the romance of everything. And in the second read, I found myself a lot more in tune with Bree and Alice's friendship because I was just kind of marveling at how well done it was. There was this rift and conflict that we see between friends often when they're moving into kind of this new environment. And there was definitely tension and hurt on both sides between Bree and Alice in this book. And it's so easy, especially since we're following Bree, and Bree is such a compelling, full protagonist, to be on Bree's side in the reading of events. But especially in this reread, it's also very easy to see Alice's side of things, why she would be concerned, why she would be frustrated. So I loved kind of watching the fullness of the friendship develop in this book and then get over that conflict, but also be allowed to have those hurt feelings because I think it was very honest and very real. And these young women are incredibly compelling, which means when I got to Bloodmarked, I was incredibly excited to see how their friendship continued to develop. As I said in my Feature Friday on Bloodmarked, this was an expert sequel. I was a little nervous as much as I was excited, I'm not gonna lie, because Legendborn kind of shot out of the gate so powerfully, and it was so masterfully structured and intriguing and tight that I was like, how do we follow this up? What is she going to do? And I think that the 2-year wait time was incredibly worth it here because it does what a sequel, what a middle novel, presumably, I don't know how long this series is going to go on, needs to do by kind of subverting what is established in the first book, getting a little darker, and also widening out the world in different ways than we as readers may have anticipated. As a reader, I'm anticipating kind of broadening the Legendborn side of things, and we do, but we also subvert that and go outside of that and say, nope, we're going to look at the wider world as well and kind of see what the outside view of this is. What are the kind of complications and limitations to this legacy? And with that, we get further romance, and almost more importantly, we get this real kind of ensemble thing that I adored. We get to spend more time with the characters we love from the first book, or at least the characters I love from the first book, so I really lucked out, while also introducing these new fun characters as well. We get more time with Will, and we get more time developing Bree and Alice's friendship. So we see them kind of in the first book in conflict with these growing pains, and in Bloodmarked we see them as a real team. We also get Alice's eyes as kind of the outsider, which is important because in the first book we are being shown or introduced into this world through Bree's eyes, and Bree is the outsider. And we are still getting that to a large extent in this book, especially because we are discovering so many new pockets of the world, but Alice can't really see the magic. So for us as readers, we are most like Alice. Alice is our representation, our eyes. And even though she has these limitations of this lack of magic and the inability to see magic, we still get to see her incredibly strong, fighting for her friends. We get to see her mind on display and how her mental agility solves problems for them as a group, how she still has power and importance within this group that is largely magical, even without magical powers. And additionally, like I said, we are seeing her and Bree operate as a team, which I loved, because we are seeing Bree's stability, especially in other relationships, kind of break in this book, as we often do with middle books. And that's not uncommon to see a protagonist support system kind of crumble, especially in the second book, which is often darker. However, I really enjoyed seeing where things like that were kind of subverted. We still see it played into in other aspects, but then we get to see this friendship that was kind of crumbling in the first book really solidify in this book. That being said, probably not unexpectedly, there are twists at the end of this that is going to make the wait for the next book pretty hard. So I'm excited to see where this series is going to continue to go, because I think that this book was just so solidly executed and just so fun on top of that. It was an entertaining, fast-paced, engaging read, and so it was propulsive and fun, and you're caught up in that. But then when you take a step back, when you're done, or when you close the book for a moment, what have you, you can kind of look at the structure and be like, man, that is also incredibly smart and just well done. So love this series. I'm very excited about it and to see where it goes. And then I read some more poetry, Time as a Mother by Ocean Vuong. I was reading or pulling from some of those Goodreads nominated poetry collections to kind of have a starting place, since I am admittedly still a novice at poetry, but I have read On Earth We're Briefly Gorgeous, and I can definitely tell that this is coming from the same person, and I definitely enjoyed this collection. It was definitely reflective, languid, beautiful, a little dark. There was a sense of place and an emotional place, especially here. And again, I am not super eloquent when it comes to poetry, but I definitely enjoyed this collection, and it was much different than the collection I read earlier this month, so it was interesting to look at them both separately and together. These poems were definitely longer in comparison to the other collection I read, but there was a real emotional rawness and honesty to them. Not saying the other collection wasn't emotionally honest or raw, but it almost was a little bit more comedic or wry or tongue-in-cheek, and this was much more stripped down emotionally, or at least it felt that way, while the language was still very lush and elaborate in other ways. But both I felt were very accessible collections, because again, I'm no expert. And then I read a graphic novel that was also nominated on the Goodreads Choice Awards that I can't talk about because it's a HarperCollins title. But I read it, so there you go. There it is. But then I read another graphic novel that was not a HarperCollins title, or at least not that I can find listed or connected anywhere, and that is the first volume of Lore Olympus, which I finally got my hands on and started. This definitely feels like if you like the Katie Robert Dark Olympus series, you'll enjoy this. It definitely has a similar vibe in how it's setting up Olympus as a city with the gods and goddesses as this kind of ruling class, socialites, influencer types. I do believe this started as a webtoon, but I don't know anything about that side of the internet, if I'm going to be completely honest with you. So this is my first interaction with it. I definitely get Ariana Grande vibes from the art direction and design of Persephone in this. I'm definitely enjoying it. That being said, I will warn you that there is a sexual assault toward the end of volume 1 that I was not anticipating, or anticipating it to be handled like it was, which does fall in line with Greek mythology, but I just want to let you know it's there because it is definitely a change of tone from what I was expecting from it. So just, you know, forewarned is forearmed and all of that. I do agree with my friend who recommended this as a library checkout versus a buy, just because 1, it reads very quickly, and 2, I personally don't know how much I'm gonna revisit this, but it was definitely fun and I'm going to continue with the series for sure. And now we're getting into the end of the month. As you can see this month, unsurprisingly probably, I was really gravitating toward both shorter things and things that were easier to jump kind of in and out of, especially things like poetry, graphic novels. They were easy for me to kind of pick back up when I needed that escape. And then over Christmas, I did manage to get in some holiday romances. Now, I typically don't gravitate toward holiday romances. I'll read them here or there, but I'm not someone that like gets excited to read holiday romance every year in the same way that you would get excited to watch like the Hallmark Channel. But this year, 1, there were titles I was excited about coming out, and 2, it made me feel a little closer to my aunt. My aunt loved watching TV and movies, but she was much more a sitcoms and procedurals type. She loved NCIS especially, and in terms of books, she gravitated toward thrillers and mysteries of like the Sue Grafton, J.D. Robb vein of mysteries. And so kind of her most unexpected love was Hallmark Christmas movies. And toward the end, and apologies because I really thought I was gonna be able to hold it together here, we had the Hallmark Channel on for her, and they were just kind of on in the background. And I wasn't really watching personally, but I would occasionally kind of narrate to my grandma what was going on screen because she can't really see anymore. And that being said, while I didn't start watching Christmas romances this season, I have in the past, don't get me wrong. Reading the Christmas romances felt like a way to both escape, to decompress. It was something I could jump in and out of easily like the rest of the month, and it also felt like a way to connect and honor my aunt in just this small thing. And I know it's not elaborate, but it's one of those connections that you cling to when you have a loved one that you are losing or you've lost, and especially to lose someone at the holidays. It was just an escape and a way to honor her at the same time, because she loved Christmas and so did my grandpa, who we lost earlier this year, though he was not a Christmas romance kind of guy. So to get the emotional side out of the way, the first Christmas romance I read was You're a Mean One, Matthew Prince by Timothy Janowski. This is perfect for fans of Schitt's Creek because it follows kind of socialite influencer Matthew Prince as he is banished to his grandparents' kind of rural cottage type after he has purchased an island, which is a PR or potential PR disaster for his parents. His father is big in, like, I don't know, hedge funds. His mother is a famous author who has a popular series that became a popular TV show, which is also currently en route to Broadway. And there is definitely the same kind of over-the-top humor to everything as he kind of winds up in this small town and finds out that he has to share bunk beds with this guy Hector because his grandparents have taken in this student who needed a place to stay, and they butt heads immediately. But they soon come to a truce of sorts, especially as they are thrown together to plan this small business association kind of end-of-the-year party fundraiser that one is needed to help save his grandmother's store, her bookstore, and he hopes that this will help him escape back to the city, especially in time for his famous New Year's party that he's planning with his best friend, who isn't so great a friend, according to the narrative. Now, we are getting this through Matthew's point of view. It is first person, which is both understandable and hard at the same time, because it definitely imbues that humor, but it means that at the beginning, we have this pretty unlikable character. He's very disconnected from reality, and we do see him morph and change over the course of the book, but there has to be just enough heart at the beginning to keep us as readers on his side. And I think the humor definitely helps with that. It makes it so everything isn't quite as serious and dire, especially when he's doing pretty privileged things. But then having Hector as a balance to that as well helps. It kind of grounds this over the top that exists within Matthew's point of view. That being said, we don't get Hector's point of view, which I think personally I would have liked, especially because Matthew's point of view is a little bit more over the top. It means that we don't get as full a breadth of Hector as I feel like we could have, or even Matthew to that extent. I think having Hector's point of view would have provided a little bit more grounding. However, one, I do think we need to see Matthew become more grounded as the novel progresses. Seeing that change is the real thing we're in the adventure for as much as the romance, right? And it probably would have been a little jarring to switch back from narrative extremes in that way. Because Matthew is so over the top, he does teeter, especially toward the beginning, on character. So I think if we had had a more grounded point of view, it would have made Matthew feel completely inaccessible and not like a person at all. There were admittedly times I struggled with that anyway, but it was a part of the thing. And I did appreciate the banter throughout, especially between Matthew and the friend he made at the local coffee shop. So this was just fun, and I think as long as you go in with the proper expectations, it's just gonna be fun. And it definitely did feel like a holiday romance movie. I could see this on the Hallmark Channel 100%. And then I read a Kobo exclusive that I had bought last Christmas by Talia Hibbert, Wrapped Up in You. This follows a young woman, Abby, who goes to her grandma's for Christmas along with her brothers who arrive later, and most importantly, her best friend Will, who just happens to be a famous actor and has been voted sexiest alive, you know, the usual. But Will has a plan this Christmas because he has been in love with Abby, and he is determined to win her over the course of the next year, and Christmas is his start. However, he is very obvious in his flirting, and Abby catches on to it and is like, what the heck is going on? Which sends him into a spiral because he sees his whole plan falling apart before it can even be executed. So when he confesses his feelings to Abby, Abby doesn't really believe him. And so the rest of the holiday is kind of a little bit the discomfort of grappling with these feelings, but also kind of dealing with accepting love that you didn't expect but do want. So there's a lot of flirtation between the two of them, and they are kind of snowed in to this cottage at one point. So this was a lot of fun. You've got friends to lovers, you've got celebrity, although outside of the purview of the celebrity angle, and also just that sense of extended pining. I would have loved if this were a full length as well, but I'll take what I can get. And then to wrap it up like we started, I read a holiday Avon romance that I can't talk about. So that was December. Like I said, things that I could kind of pop in and out of easily, or that were good escapes amidst all of the other going on in the month. And those are what also ultimately got us to 117 titles for the year. So with that, we are officially finished with 2022. If you've read any of these, I would love to hear your thoughts, but otherwise, thanks for hanging out. Thanks for going through 2022 reading with me, and I'm looking forward to what 2023 has in store in terms of reading. So like and subscribe if you feel like it, read something good, and yeah, bye.